Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to this afternoon edition, the September edition of Afternoons with Anthar. And we are delighted and very honored that we have with us today Dr. Karan Singh. Everyone has known of him, everyone knows him. He continues to be a Yuvraj, ever young. He has been the the first Sadr Riyasat of Jammu Kashmir. He was the youngest minister. He's been a long-standing parliamentarian. He's been a diplomat. He's been a minister. But more than that, he's been an intellectual, a scholar, a statesman, a person who's not hesitated to call a spade ever. So thank you very much, Dr. Karan Singh. It's an honor for us that you are with us today. In fact, your erudition and scholarship is very well known, and I will not dwell on, I will not spend time speaking on it because very soon our audience will be face to face with you and Makarand Paranjape. Makarand is a very dear friend, now currently teaching English at the JNU, but till very recently, he was the director of the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies at Shimla. And together we have been part of the Aram program for the IAS officers at Statue of Unity. He's been participating in the Ek Bharat Shresth Bharat program. And it's a real pleasure and an honor for us to have you with us today. So with these few words, the format is as follows. We'll first request Dr. Karan Singh to speak for about 3 to 4 minutes about reflections on reflections. And then I'll request Karan to start the conversation with him. We go on for about 40 to 45 minutes, by which time all the questions that come on the YouTube, we'll try to take as many of them as we can. So thank you very much. And over to you, Dr. Karan Singh.
Thank you, Sanjeev Chopra, Festival Director. My good friend Makarand Paranjape, who meets me once every 3 years. Sanjay Arya of Shubhi Publication. Viewers, visible and invisible, and friends. It is a great pleasure to be here in a literary festival. And my book, Reflections, has been chosen. These essays have been written over a period of time and on a wide variety of subjects. So Shubhi has done an interesting work. They've chosen these lectures from all that I've written and published them. I've written in several genres. I've written a novel, I've written poetry, but the essay is my preferred genre. Because I feel that in an essay, one can, within a reasonably short format, put across important ideas. In an essay, you don't have the luxury of having a lot of fluff and packing. You've got to just get to the point. So I think you'll find that in these essays, I've tried, to the best of my ability, give my viewpoint on these various issues. Everybody will obviously not agree with my viewpoint, but nonetheless, I felt that it is my duty to put forward my views very clearly. And as the book says, there are essays on politics/history, religion/philosophy, culture/general, and education, which really Makarand covers almost the whole gamut of human concerns. So those are the essays, and they're before you, and I'm ready to respond to whatever questions they may be. Should we pass it on to Makarand Chopra?
Yes, over to you, Makarand, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sanjeev, for inviting me. And thank you, Dr. Karan Singh, for this wonderful afternoon of reflections with you. You know that there are few people in public life or private who I admire and cherish as much as you. And our association goes back some 3 decades. And you've also been my chancellor at Jawaharlal Nehru University. We have collaborated on many events together, and I was very happy and proud to be instrumental in the Bridge Builder Award from the Doshi Foundation, which you got. I had something to do with writing the citation. And though you couldn't attend the award, I received it on your behalf, if you remember, and brought it back to you with the modest, at least by your standards, prize. Anyhow, I'm so delighted that at the age of 90 plus, you're still so active. I want to congratulate you on completing not just 90 years, Huzur, but over 7.5 decades in public life. And I love this book. Let me put it up for our readers to see. It's a very readable book. It's got 40 essays in 4 sections, as we've already heard. And I couldn't put it down. And for me, each essay was a gem, a nugget, which gave us a glimpse of your long and distinguished career. And may I say this, Dr. Karan Singh, that I didn't find a single false note in this whole collection.
Thank you. You're very kind.
I mean, there's not a single word in it that anybody could question your integrity, the balance of position, the sagacity shines through in every word. Of course, there are a few typos here and there. Mr. Arya, please take care of these. Typos to hai in one place, instead of bow, the word is blow, so it completely changes the meaning. And it has a reference to Shiva, so I was a bit disturbed that. So instead of bowing to Shiva, it's like blowing off Shiva, which was strange. But the thing I wanted to really mention here, another little suggestion, is that I wish, at least in the next edition, the essays were dated and their original publication given at the bottom, so we could get some context, and it would help us relate to your long and distinguished career. So let me start. I think my dear friend Sanjeev might also agree that a good place to start is with a figure so reviled today, which is so unfortunate. That is Jawaharlal Nehru, our first Prime Minister. And by any yardstick, a very distinguished, Prime Minister, a lover of India, a great thinker, statesman, politician, and of course, freedom fighter. And the first essay in this reflection, a series of reflections, is called Remembering Nehru. And I say that, of course, Dr. Karan Singh is really very fair to Nehru, though he calls him his mentor and guide in many respects, because he points out his errors also. There's no bias, though there's so much affection and respect for Nehru. He talks about Nehru's Himalayan blunders, the blunder with China. Dr. Karan Singh, calls a spade a spade. He mentions Krishna Menon, the debacle on our borders. He mentions, for instance, Kashmir, which was another one of Nehru's blunders, it would seem in retrospect. But before I ask my question, Huzur, I'm so touched by your description of our Prime Minister, how when he visited your palace where he stayed, the streets would be lined up by cheering citizens who threw flowers in his way and said Jawaharlal Nehru ki jai, Zindabad, and all that. And then you recollect the last time you saw him when his sister Vijayalakshmi Pandit was there, and Nehru was too weak to get up. But when you entered the room, he attempted to get up, and you said, no, please don't get up. And of course, we know his ashes were scattered in the various rivers of India. And it is you, Dr. Karan Singh, who had the privilege of scattering his ashes in the Jhelum, a river which flows into, through Kashmir, your beloved land. So, what the question I want to ask you is that do you think that this current trend to blame Nehru for all our ills is well advised? And what is the correction? My real point is we don't have to demean anybody, even if we disagree with that person. What is your view on this kind of politics of demeaning some of our past figures? In fact, the ICHR had a poster of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, and they left out Nehru for some reason. Apparently, they apologized and they're going to bring him back. But what is your view of this excessive dismantling of Nehru?
No, I think it is extremely unfortunate, Makaran, that the current regime is doing that, because it can't be done. I mean, Jawaharlal Nehru was for 17 years the first Prime Minister of free India. And he's left his mark on every single aspect of our life, whether it is our industry, whether it is our science, whether it is the army or the administration or education. And to try and delete him from the national movement is ridiculous. As ridiculous as deleting Sukarno from the Indonesian movement, for example, or deleting Mandela from the South African movement. You can't do it. And he was, whether we like it or not, he was in a way the father of the Indian state. Gandhiji was father of the Indian nation, but of the Indian state. It was in Jawaharlal Nehru's time that the constitution was put into effect. Of course, it was drafted by Dr. Ambedkar and B.N. Rao, but it was only Jawaharlal's influence that it was passed. There was a lively debate on many issues. His broad empathy with the masses and his efforts to have social reform. Personally, of course, he was my mentor and my guru in many ways. So, as I have mentioned, he did make what I consider to be some miscalculation. But you cannot blame him for that. And any attempt to delete him is to be strongly opposed. It's a ghatia thing to do, if I can use it's a petty thing to do. It's not a thing to do. I sincerely hope that the Prime Minister doesn't agree with it. I'm sure he was also told, once I had occasion to discuss it, that you cannot negate Jawaharlal Nehru's contribution. So all I can say is that I hope that this trend stops. You make your own heroes if you like. Don't try and demean people. This man was held in tremendous love and respect by millions of people in this country. By demeaning him, you're insulting those people. So I hope
Exactly.
to stop.
Exactly, Huzur. In fact, I would say by demeaning Nehru, we are also demeaning ourselves and diminishing India's, should I say, broad-based appreciation of people of all political and ideological persuasions. In fact, in my own university, Dr. Singh, of which you were Chancellor, as I just mentioned, there was an attempt to vandalize the statue of.
Can you imagine? I had that statue put up.
Exactly. No. I'm saying there was an attempt to. I'm just coming to that attempt to vandalize the statue of Swami Vivekananda, and I oppose that, saying we don't have to do that. I appeal to our leftists and other students in the campus that please don't do that. And I must say, Huzur, you put up the statue of Nehru. And what's wonderful today, when I walk in the campus of JNU, these two great men are looking at each other. And they don't blink. It's only the others who are so divisive that they want to choose one over the other. They actually just face each other.
When I became Chancellor of Makarand, I realized there was nothing of Jawaharlal Nehru in the campus at all. No photograph, no picture, nothing. So I said, I'm going to put up a statue. And it's a very nice statue because I was involved with the person who did it, who was a very good friend of mine, and the sculptor. And he made a very good statue. Now, Vivekananda is also one of my heroes. So, there's no question of judging. They are both great men.
This is what we learn from you. This is what I was going to say for the younger generations and those who are listening to us. This is what we learn from you, Dr. Karan Singh, that you don't have to have this binary and polarized vision of India, its history, its past, and its culture. Now, let me come to a follow-up question. It's interesting, though, about your statue. I think I've mentioned this to you in private. What I love about the statue of Nehru is it's a very dynamic statue. It's like he's on moving. The go, He's moving.
He was always like that.
Whereas it's very interesting that Swami Vivekananda is very still. So I like that stillness and dynamism, which, as you know, are two aspects of the great personality of Shiva himself. I'm going to come to Shiva in a bit. I'm going to talk about your great Amarnath Yatra, where you actually follow in the footsteps of Swami Vivekananda and the account in Nivedita's book. You're going exactly in those very steps, from Pahalgam up, and you're in a Doli and all that. I'll come to that in a moment. But let's talk about this other great maker of modern India, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, whom, of course, our Prime Minister admires so much that he's raised the highest statue in the world for Patel. Now, few people know that you were very close to Sardar Patel as well. And you have in your book this beautiful incident where it was Sardar Patel who advised your father that after your hip injury, you were confined to a wheelchair for a while. And
Yeah.
it was, sorry, there's a flight overhead, so JNU is very noisy for a variety of reasons. So I apologize for the overhead flight, but in case you heard it. But you mentioned there how it was Sardar Patel who advised your father that you should be sent to the United States for treatment. And after several surgeries, you recovered. And of course, now we all know you walk on your own 2 feet. Can you tell us about that incident, Dr. Karan Singh?
See, what happened was I developed some problem in my hip in the middle of 1947. And I was put into a plaster Paris cast in Srinagar by Dr. Mirajkar, who was a well-known from Mumbai. He was an orthopedic expert. And then I was in there for 6 months and I got no better. And when we came down to Jammu in October, when my father signed the instrument of accession, I think it was in December that Sardar came. And he asked my father, why is this boy on the wheelchair? He said, Sardar, he's been on plaster for how long? He said, 7 months. He said, Maharaj Sahab, send him to America immediately. Otherwise, he will spend the rest of his life in this wheelchair. And my mother was saying,
of course, your book also mentions
do you
how...
want your son to walk again or do you not? If you want him to walk again, send him. So within 15 days, the arrangements were made. I left, and on the 31st of December 1947, I reached New York in an ambulance from the airport to the home. So thanks to him, I was able to walk again. I even played tennis with a good doubles partner. I played golf, I did everything. Thanks to Sardar Patel. So I am as much indebted to him as I am to Jawaharlal Nehru for his intellectual and political freedom. And Sardar invited me as his guest in the Dehradun guest house for a fortnight. When he was very ill, this must have been June, early June 47. Money Man was looking after him. He would call me in the evening and he would talk to me. It was a great honor to have both these great men patronizing in the best sense of the term, patronizing.
This guest house is just behind the academy, actually. It's actually in Mussoorie. I think it's in Mussoorie. It's a guest house in Mussoorie. And that guest house...
No, not the Mussoorie one. The Dehradun one. With that beautiful lawn they have.
That's the circuit house. That's the circuit house.
That's
the circuit house. Because Sardar Patel used to come and stay at the Birla Niwas, which is just behind the academy. That's also the place where the Dalai Lama first came and settled in India. Not settled in India, but that was his first.
The circuit house was where I went and stayed.
Yeah. Okay.
In fact, both these figures are very deeply connected with Labasna also, where the civil servants are trained, because as we all know, it was Sardar Patel who was in a way the founder of our civil service and made sure that our bureaucrats were protected from political interference. But Huzur, coming back to the knotty question, KNOTTY, of Kashmir, do you think, with your vast experience and the hindsight that we have, your book says how Sardar Patel and your father then fell out, they were hardly on speaking terms, which is what made the government make you the Sadar-e-Riyasat at such a young age. And you were very popular in Kashmir. Where do you think we went wrong? Do you think we could have avoided going to the United Nations and made Kashmir a part of India with a full and complete accession right then?
Yes, I think it was Lord Mountbatten who persuaded Jawaharlal Nehru, saying that, it's an open and shut case of aggression. Why don't you go there? You're the great leader of the newly freed democracies, and by going there, your image will go on. I think it was Mountbatten who urged Jawaharlal Nehru, but ultimately the decision was Jawaharlal Nehru. I agree it was a decision that could have been avoided because by going to the United Nations, far from getting an early response, the matters got bogged down forever. And we were on the, Zafrullah Khan, who was representing Pakistan, was outshone Gopalaswamy Iyengar. And so in the United Nations itself, we were not able to carry the day. That was a
You
mistake.
Speaking, of the great figures of that period, as we segue from the first section, which is on politics and history, because I know we could talk about this for hours, but it wouldn't be fair to your book. Though I must say that this is such a fascinating topic, the topic of Kashmir, because our problems there are far from over. What with the Taliban taking over Afghanistan now? But we may leave that for the end. As I said, when we move from one section to another, maybe another great person to invoke from that period is Sri Aurobindo, whom you admire greatly, I know. You've been the chairman, the president of the Auroville Foundation. You have a beautiful pyramidical temple in Pondicherry, which you made with your own money. I know that. So, when we move from politics and history to spirituality, religion, philosophy, perhaps you can tell us about what you think about Sri Aurobindo, who was the prophet of Indian nationalism, as you called him in your PhD thesis, which is such a good book. I still recommend it to our students because in this book you talk about world government, you talk about a new planetary consciousness. So, can you tell us about your own association with Sri Aurobindo and his thought?
Well, I never met Sri Aurobindo himself, but I came to him through Dilip Kumar Roy. Remember Dilip Kumar Roy, the singer and the composer? He wrote a book called Among the Great. I think this must have been in the late 40s or early 50s, where he interviewed 5 great people: Mahatma Gandhi, Rabindranath Tagore, Romain Rolland, Bertrand Russell, and Sri Aurobindo.
Sri Aurobindo.
And that is where I first read about Sri Aurobindo. And there he mentioned an Englishman called Sri Krishna Prem. And that whetted my appetite. When I wrote to Deepda, he sent me his second book. Sri Aurobindo came to me. And that is how I got involved in the whole Aurobindo movement. I was never an Aurobindonian in the sense I never went to the ashram. But I have great admiration for the scope of that man, his intellect, astounding. It covers the entire human condition. You read his books. They're not easy to read, I have warned you. But then this Auroville was created by the mother, but long after Sri Aurobindo passed away. Auroville was created only 25, 50 years ago, and he passed away in 1970.
1950. Sri Aurobindo passed in 1950, 5th
5th
December.
of December. And Auroville was later, then the government set it up by an act of parliament, set up the Auroville Foundation, which I chaired for 20 years. So I've been very much involved. I wrote my PhD on him. I visited Auroville, of course, frequently, and the ashram. I'm greatly impressed by his tremendous vision. You see, he was interested in politics also. Unfortunately, what happens because of his stature as a yogi, people forget. Same thing about Gurudev. Because of his elements as a poet, people forget he was interested in politics. His essays on man and humanism are excellent essays. Similarly, Aurobindo's last essays are about Indian freedom, about Asia's role, about India's role in world spirituality. Only in the end does he talk about his own personal view. That is about the evolution of consciousness, which was
You're
his
talking about the 5 dreams of Sri Aurobindo.
5 dreams of Sri Aurobindo, which was his last broadcast with the university in Andhra Pradesh. And that is a different matter. I find some problem with that because the time frame is very long. The time frame for the evolution of consciousness is so long, millions of years. वो गालिब कहता है ना, हमने माना कि तगाफुर न करोगे लेकिन खाक हो
खाक हो
जाएगा
ये हम
खबर
उनको
होने तक.
खबर
But
होने
at the
तक.
time was a little too long. But his essays on the Gita, masterly essays. He is a great intellect, and a great
Was you
freedom fighter earlier.
you mentioned Sri Madhav Ashish and of course Sat Prem
Krishna Prem.
of Mir Tola. But in your section on religion and philosophy, there's nothing on these two great figures. Maybe you can tell us. And I've read your letters with
Have you? You know, they were
yes,
Englishmen. Both were Englishmen. Krishna Prem was a brilliant man. He was an Air Force pilot, but he came out to India as a professor, I think, in Lucknow University. He's brilliant. He's from Cambridge, I think. And there his the wife of the vice chancellor, Ishoda Ma, an elderly lady, she became his guru. And he then chucked his job and went to Banaras at a much lower salary. Then ultimately became a sannyasi, begging. But you must read his two books, The Yoga of the Bhagavad Gita, and The Yoga of the Katha. He writes so luminously, constantly comparing it with Western mystics. Enemies Trismegistus, for example, Meister Eckhart, Rise Broken, the Western mystical tradition. And he combines the two. His disciple was Sri Madhava Ashish, also an Englishman. He was an engineer, came to India on a holiday, came to the ashram, met Gopalda and stayed there for the rest of his life.
what a wonderful story. And in some of your difficult moments, they advised you. I know
Yes.
your letters with Madhav Ashish da, and there's a particular letter which moved me a lot when you wrote to him, if I may mention that letter, where you said, and you had at that time broken with Mrs. Gandhi over the emergency, and you had written to him that you still cared for what people thought about you. And then Madhavda writes back saying that what the world thinks about us is not important because they desert us when we lose power and position. So the good opinion of those who themselves are so fickle is not worth earning. And then you write back,
Yes, yes.
but
I must say,
I,
you read the book very, very closely.
and you told me the same thing when some of us hoped that you would be president of India, and somehow it didn't come about. And you said the opinion of others who are themselves so fickle is not worth, holding in such high esteem. So
Yeah, that was good advice.
you've been a karma yogi and a great philosopher and
I
a
don't know about
practitioner yourself. So, can you tell us about your own insights into Vedanta and its capacity to bring peace and harmony in the world?
You see, my approach to religion is twofold. Philosophically, it is the Vedanta, which means the Upanishads, which are marvelous documents. They are extraordinary documents, and they constantly talk about the world as a family. They talk about how you should see yourself in everybody and everybody in yourself. How ultimately, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, all these great concepts. Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, the truth called it by many names. So all the great things, whether it's secularism, whether it is democracy, whether it is uh, global welfare, they are the supreme texts of Gita is derivative. People don't realize that. Gita is a derivative text. It's a Shruti. Upanishads are Shruti. The her. Gita is on the Quran. Although Gita is very popular, and I speak on the Gita greatly, Upanishad. So my philosophy is Vedanta, but my personal worship is Shiva.
Shiva.
Now these two are, you can call them in a way, they are not separate, but they are both parts of the spiritual quest. So for the philosophy, I go to the Upanishads. For worship, I go to Shiva. And Shiva Nataraja, dancing Shiva, is my very special favorite. The temple you mentioned.
Yes, and there are so many Natarajas in your home, and even the beautiful one in the annex of the India International Center has been donated by you. It's a Chola bronze, and it really brings the essay, The Dance of Shiva, of the great Ananda Kumaraswamy to life. And that's probably the good place to talk about your Amarnath Yatra. As we all know that Amarnath means the Lord of Immortality, and Swami Vivekananda had a great and transforming spiritual experience at Amarnath, and you follow exactly in those footsteps, including, I remember you've written like a verse to that river Lidar, which flows by this, before you reach Amarnath, and after Pahalgam, your trip. So, did you have any great experience at Amarnath, Dr. Karan
Well,
Singh?
first of all, let me tell you, you know how old I was when I wrote that? I was 21.
Oh,
It was written way back in 1952. This is the
oh,
earliest essay in this. That was my first essay was published, my first published essay in the Hindustan Times in 3 installments.
I see. That's why
So
I
it
said they
was
should have been dated. But I
written
think,
when
I
I was
think,
21, but I think it's still relevant in the sense the Sheshnag Lake is still there and Panchtarni is still
yes,
there. My wife,
yes,
who, my wife
yes,
was
so,
with me. We
yes,
were
yes, so
married.
true.
We were married when I was 19 and she was 13. So when we went to
Wow.
Amarnath, I was 21 and she was 15.
And she walked all the way. The book says she
Walked
walked
all the
all the
way.
way. You were in a
And
dolly.
no, I can't say I had any very dramatic experience like Swamiji there. Luckily, otherwise I would have gone because after that certain experience, you can't stay for very long. That was Vivekananda's last experience. In 3 months, he was gone. So, no, but it was a great trip. Cherish it.
I want to read, with your permission, that little poem you have written to the stream of Lidar, which is after Chandanwadi. And because I think readers need to know that you're a poet as well. And I think, apart from me, only 100 people know that you're a novelist as well. You wrote a fantastic novel, which is in the same tradition as The Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. It's an autobiographical novel, and it's also a love story, if I may so say. So, this is the trip, Sheshnag, Chandanwadi, and you cross the stream, then the Mahagunas Pass, and then the descent. And here, I'm trying to, you do mention Margaret Noble, better known as Sister Nivedita, and Swami Vivekananda. So you're going over the same terrain, and
Yes.
then the
Yes.
kirtan, and then how you return, and then the tank of death, the Hatyaro Talao. All this is mentioned, and then you have this. A Gujar tribesman, he says, Sarkar, Khuda helps those who are patient. This is on page 203. Difficulties and trouble come, but one must bear them with patience and faith in God. Take this pilgrimage. On the first day, it rained heavily, and then there was much discomfort. If you had been disheartened and turned back, the pilgrimage would have failed. But you had faith in God and pushed on. The result was that the pilgrimage was a great success. Huzur, do you think this is the motto of the book and indeed of your life?
Well, in a way, it is, I suppose, yes. Yes. One has to confront difficulties. Everything is not a bed of roses, particularly in politics. But I think one has to carry on if you have a certain amount of energy and a certain amount of faith and integrity, you just carry on. There's ups and downs, you win some, you lose some. And that's what life is like. C'est la vie, as a French say. That's what life is like.
I know you're French and you're fluent in French, and you were
No, no,
actually born
I'm
in
not,
Monaco.
I'm not fluent in French. I wish I was. But I was born in France, but that's a different matter. But any other questions? There must be other questioners, Makarand.
Makarand, can we pause here? And there are questions from the audience which I'll like to share with you. there's that question, and in fact, a lot of young people have read your book and they've commented on the fact that you supported the Supreme Court judgment on decriminalization of homosexuality.
Yes, yes.
And they've taken the view that it was very rare for somebody in the political mainstream to have made that point. So they want you to speak about this at length.
Well, that Article 377 was an obnoxious article. It's a shame that we had it on our books for so long after independence. It is an article, a Victorian article, put in by the British for their own reasons, in which I will not go now in detail. But it didn't suit us at all. And the fact that we carried it on for 70 years until this Sarna versus Government of India case, I think speaks very poorly of our public life. I mean, it's so obnoxious. The sexual preference is a sexual preference, for God's sake. You can't penalize people just because they have an alternative sexuality. And that is something I felt very strongly about all my life. So when the judgment finally came, I came out with this essay called, I think I called it a Judgment for India.
Yes,
And
yes.
I said it, let me see it. I mean, not very many people write about it because they don't feel strongly about it, I think.
And I think they were also scared of taking it out of the closet. But I think this is something that you've talked about, and you've talked about it very openly. So
Yes.
at least for a lot of our young readers, they're very excited about this.
Yes,
They're
yes,
very happy
absolutely.
that you brought
Absolutely,
this
this
up.
is something we should.
to
And
the
please
forefront.
remember, Supreme Court made a marvelous judgment. Apart from shooting down this horrible 377, they made a general remark that the society owes a debt to the
LGBTQ plus. Yes.
for the way they were being mistreated over the centuries. We owe a debt of we owe a debt to them. We owe an apology. This court said it very clearly. So I think this is something that anybody who believes in human freedom should support.
In fact, I think I'll quote from what you've written in this book. Dr. Singh writes that nature is much more varied and inclusive than many realize, and alternate sexuality has been found in almost all cultures, ancient and modern, around the world. So it is also to normalize it. So I think that's a very important aspect that you brought out. The other question which is or the other comment which is there, support for you is your defense of Professor Feroz Khan when he was appointed as a professor of Sanskrit in BHU, but was not appointed in that particular department. Later on, of course, we found a way to adjust him in another department. So you came out openly and you said that Sanskrit is not just the language for Hindu; it's a universal language, and that if we have to make it universal, then we have to make it more inclusive. So again, maybe you could throw some more light
You see,
on this.
there again, this comes from the idea that we must exclude certain people. We can't. Or if we talk of the Indian or even the Hindu cultural heritage, it is getting together. Let us all work together. Let noble thoughts come to us from every side. So just because the gentleman was a Muslim, you refuse to appoint him in a Sanskrit department, I think that's disgraceful. If he is properly qualified, and if you want more Muslims to study Sanskrit, then you must encourage them rather than discourage them and work against them. So I felt again very strongly on that. I come from a Muslim majority state, for God's sake. 80% of J&K are Muslims. I've grown up with Muslims, going to Muslim shrines and so on. So for me, secularism is not just a constitutional thing. It is something that I've grown up with. If we believe in the divine, Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam Hrideshati, it says the Lord resides in the heart of all beings, not only in the heart of Hindus. Therefore, we can't reject people on the basis of religion. course, fanaticism has to be fought wherever it rears its ugly head. We cannot do that. By doing that, we are doing disservice to Hinduism and to Vedanta. That's what I feel.
Absolutely. There's another point which you make in your book, Dr. Karan Singh, when you say that the integration of the world should not be the integration of the markets, but it should be the integration of mind. It should be the integration of cultures. Yeah. So, but somehow the other globalization just means globalization in terms of having the same brands everywhere. So maybe you could talk about your vision of globalization.
You see, I have nothing against globalization in markets. Sooner or later, markets are becoming globalized, although now you have 2 or 3 major sort of countries which are vying with each other. Now, globalization, technology has already globalized us. I pick up a small telephone, few numbers, and I'll onto San Francisco. I mean, it's unbelievable. When we grew up, there was not even a computer. There was no television. Young people won't believe that human civilization has existed for 5,000 years without a mobile. But in fact, it has. But the fact of the matter is, these have globalized us. So, globalized commercially, globalized technologically, but basically globalized spiritually. Unless you have some spiritual awareness of the oneness of the human race, we're going to go on killing ourselves as we are doing now. If we are stuck in the old philosophy of exclusion, we'll ultimately end up blowing up the world, I think, as many philosophers have said.
Over to you, Professor Makarand.
Yeah, I don't know. I suddenly got dumped by StreamYard for some reason, and it was difficult to get back in. But I think you've covered the middle section. So let me now jump to the final section of the book, which is on education, which is really very dear to your heart. I know, Huzur, you've been the youngest ever Vice Chancellor, not Vice Chancellor, but Chancellor of Banaras Hindu University. So, Chancellor. I think you were you were not yet 30. You were 29 or 28, if I'm not mistaken.
When I was Chancellor of the J&K University, I was 18. Yes.
Oh my goodness. So
when I became Chancellor of BHU, Chancellor of BHU, I was then 31.
Oh yes, 31. Just 30. So I wanted to ask you about the 4 pillars of learning.
But the Chancellor is an honorific term. But I've always been interested in education, apart from the honorific part of it, giving away degrees. I must have given away thousands and thousands of degrees. I meet people around the world who say, "Aapne mujhe degree di thi us saal." It's very encouraging to meet people like that around the world.
So, Dr. Karan Singh,
can you tell us about? Is something I could refer you to that UNESCO report.
That's what I was going to say. Can you tell us about the 4 pillars of education?
Yes. Well, the UNESCO report, there was a commission set up by UNESCO for education in the 21st century. It was headed by Jacques Delors, the European statesman. And there were 15 of us drawn around the world for our individual, not representing any country. And we worked for 2 years and traveled around the world and came out with a report called Learning the Treasure Within. That's the name of the report. You can see already that the report is not just a normal report. In that report, we identified what we call the 4 pillars of learning. And those 4 pillars are: the first is learning to know, the Jnana Yoga, the capacity to receive knowledge, the capacity to ask questions. Because we are a dialogic civilization, remember. All our texts are dialogue. Upanishads are dialogue, Gita is a dialogue, they're all dialogue. So we are a dialogic civilization. So asking questions is part of our DNA. First is learning to know, the Jnana Yoga. The second is learning to do, the Karma Yoga. I'm adding these yogas, they're not in the report, and these are I'm putting them in. Because if you don't learn to do anything, then what is the use of just having the knowledge? That's what's happening in India. We're turning out lakhs of graduates every year who have no technical skills, no possibilities of employment. So some technical skills, some way where you can do something useful is very important. That is learning to do. And then there's very important learning to live together. I think that's critical because the world will not survive if we are not able to live together and work together on areas, for example, like climate change, global warming, or interfaith realization. So, learning to live together is a very, very important part of education. They must be taught that you need to live together. And the fourth, the most interesting, is learning to be. Learning to be, to develop your inner capacities. And then to go to Iqbal. खुदी को कर बुलंद इतना कि हर तकदीर से पहले खुदा बंदे से खुद पूछे बता तेरी रज़ा क्या है खुदी की बुलंदी the developing of the concept of the inner consciousness, that is learning to be. We've got these four pillars of learning.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Karan Singh. I think we've...
I can talk about that
without doing...
No, there are...
I know,
there are,
I'm saying that...
Yes, carry on, please.
I was just going to say one more little thing that, I mean, we've not done full justice to the book, but we've touched the surface. I want readers to get hold of this book. It's published by Shubhi Prakashan. Please buy it and please tell your friends. As I said earlier, it's really a book to cherish and own and dip into over and over again because Dr. Karan Singh has been witness to an era. Now, when we celebrate India at 75, I can say that he's been in public life for 75 years. And this book also encompasses that entire spectrum. Now, one of the things, this will be my last question, which some of the readers have also mentioned.
Voice keeps getting cut off.
I'm sorry about that. I don't know what the issue really is because I can hear you perfectly, both of you.
Yeah,
but I don't know why.
Sometimes they go off while you're speaking. Your voice. Now again, you're off.
Is it better now? Can you hear me now?
Now you're on. Yes, now you're on.
Okay. So all I wanted to say was that I have just one last question to you. Oh my! I don't know how to solve this because I seem to have.
I'm sorry, I lost you.
Okay, no, I'll raise the question. If Sanjeev can hear me, he can repeat it. My question.
Yes, please.
Yeah, my question is very simple. It's also based on something that people in the audience have asked, which is that you're pretty silent on Mahatma Gandhi in this book, and I know that you've told me you don't admire him all that much. So, is he really responsible for India's partition? That's my last question to you, and then I think that Sanjeev can conduct the session from here on.
Did you again ask about Jawaharlal Nehru?
No, he asked. He's asked about. That's also a question from the audience about your views on Mahatma Gandhi and partition. And to that, Mahatma Gandhi, partition, and Makarand wanted to know your personal views because he feels that perhaps you have a different opinion than many people have.
By the way, I had the privilege of meeting Mahatma Gandhi, physically. When he came to Kashmir in 1947 in June, I was on a wheelchair. I insisted on being present. He came to meet my father and mother. I insisted on being present. My wheelchair was put in and I was sat there while Gandhiji came. Kaise ho? So I've actually seen it. Now, as far as the partition is concerned, it is a very much more complex issue than most people realize. It's not just an open and shut case. Jinnah wanted partition. What was the build up to it? What was the Congress stand? What role did the Britishers play? Gandhiji was against partition. There's no doubt about it. He was not able to prevent it. That's true. In fact, he virtually died even trying to sort of heal the scars of partition. But he was against it personally. But by the time Jawaharlal Ji and Vallabhbhai Patel, Maulana Azad and all were prepared to accept partition, Jinnah wanted the whole of Punjab and the whole of Bengal. Congress said no. If you want partition, you go to partition Punjab and partition Bengal. That was where lakhs of people were uprooted and tens of thousands were massacred. It was a terrible affair. So whenever we talk about independence, let us never forget partition. Never forget the millions of people who lost their lives. We may have been non-violent against the British, thanks to Gandhiji, but we were very violent against each other. And the way that we massacred each other is something that will go down in history as a blot upon our civil. What could we do? The situation as Jinnah was adamant. He started the whole thing, if you remember, in June 1946, the Direct Action Day. I think it was 6th of June in Calcutta. When thousands of people were murdered on the streets of Calcutta, thousands of Hindus. He was the one who really began the direct action. Then ultimately it slipped out of hand. Nobody could control it. In the final analysis, it took on a life of its own. So, what can I say? I can only say Gandhiji worked all his life for freedom and all his life he worked against partition. He succeeded in one, he failed in the other.
There is a question from the audience about your views on Veer Savarkar.
I have not read Savarkar, I must admit. So I cannot give you very much. All I've read about Savarkar is in Shashi Tharoor's book, Why I Am a Hindu. He has summed up the teaching of Savarkar, Guru Golwalkar, and Deen Dayal Upadhyay. He's chosen these three right-wing thinkers. That's where I read a little about Savarkar. I really am not in a position to give a reasoned reply to that. I have not read him at all.
There's another question.
He was a patriot, obviously. Savarkar, there's no doubt about that. Please proceed.
There's a question he says from Arjit Mahesh. He says, but how do you get so many ideas to write so many thoughts in the course of... I mean, it's a general question, but he's insistent. He asked this question.
A long time, it was written in, first one was written in when I was 21. So I've had 70 years to write these articles. I've had lots of time.
Oh, great. So, so I think we've had a variety of questions and many more questions will come. So what we'll do is we'll compile these questions and we'll send them over to your office. So maybe you can respond to them. But I thought let's end on this note of India and how the message of India was spread by Ashok and the message of Buddhism. How it spread to Southeast Asia. Yes. And you mentioned about Indonesia, you mentioned about Thailand, you mentioned about Japan. So I thought maybe we could end by India and the civilizational role that we have in the larger context of Asia.
That is quite remarkable, the way Buddhism spread throughout South and Southeast Asia. A religion which is really a very gentle religion. It's a non-violent religion. There's been some violence recently in Sri Lanka, but generally, and the way it spread, purely through philosophy and through merchants who went and all. There was no conquest by Buddhist kings. It was spread like that. Mind you, Hindu kings also spread. Angkor Wat, the biggest temple in the world, is a Hindu temple. And in Jakarta, there are the beautiful Trinity, a temple to Shiva, to Brahma, and to Vishnu in Yogyakarta. So both Hinduism and Buddhism spread largely, entirely through merchants and through traders and so on, and philosophers. So and then Vivekananda, in a way, did the same miracle centuries later. His advent to the West, in a way, was equivalent to the way that Buddhism spread. For the first time, he represented the highest watermark of Hindu thinking, which is the Vedanta, to the West. And from that day onwards, and Aurobindo, one of his dreams, mentions this, from that day onwards, Vedanta has spread, not like Buddhism so much, but it has spread quite widely in the United States and elsewhere. So when we take the highest elements of Hindu and of Indian philosophy, shall we say, Buddhist or Hindu, then that spreads in a big way. We must never get enclosed. We must never shut ourselves in. We'll be doing an injustice to ourselves by shutting ourselves in. Let us keep ourselves open. Let us spread the message of the Vedanta, of the oneness of the human race, of interfaith harmony, of the importance of women as the Shakti, as the Ardhangini, and so on. Let us spread these great concepts, and then I think India will fulfill its destiny if it does that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karan Singh. In fact, that is the way India shall rule the world. That's the way, that's the message for India. Thank you very much to our listeners. Maybe one last comment from Professor Makarand Paranjape, and then, and I think on behalf of all of us here, the over 1,574 views on YouTube, which is very
wow.
great. So, on behalf of all the 1,574 viewers on YouTube, and my behalf, and on behalf of Value of Words, I'll request Professor Makarand Paranjape to please thank Dr. Karan Singh on behalf of all of us.
Dr. Karan Singh, it's been a wonderful afternoon. I've always enjoyed talking to you. And on behalf of all those who care for you and appreciate you and who like your work, I want to wish you a century, at least another 10 years with us, and many more such wonderful, brilliant books.
Lord Shiva.
And many more conversations also. So, Om Namah Shivaya Huzur, and I hope to come and see you very soon.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. All the listeners, invisible listeners, my namaskar, my good wishes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chopra. Very nice evening.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.